Hi, you guys. So I want to take you through some imagery, some direct and indirect information in the Bible regarding the period of 40. So before I get there, let's go to, which chart do I want to go to? The one with here. This is on academia. This is the final Jubilee and an overview of world history. If you guys have not seen me go through this before, you will see me go through it now. So this is probably the easiest chart to explain this, where the overview of world history from creation to kingdom is overlaid by the pattern in the mount. The events from the giving of the law on Sinai in Exodus 19 through Joshua 13 provide a precise and exact overlay of world history in type and shadow. And when you plug in the years back in, for the purpose of going through this, we'll forget what the years are. We'll just look at the different color codings that I have here because they are meaningful with regard to Exodus 19 through Joshua 13. And when you plug the events that happen in specific years in, we can see typology of Christ. By this, I mean the giving of the law on Sinai. And so I have a few references down here. You can look this up to, I would encourage you to look it up to validate my information here. But from the giving of the law on Sinai, we have a benchmark event which begins a specific count. So, like I said, take out the years here, and we're looking at a type and shadow. Right here, where the line is drawn, is the year that Israel entered the Promised Land, which began a count, which is the 7 Sabbaths of years, the establishment of the Sabbath cycles, the weeks of years for the land, which then lead to the establishment of the Jubilee, which is in the 50th year. So from here to here, there will be 70. And the 70th Jubilee is the start of Daniel's 70th week, Nisan 10 of the final Jubilee year. So if you've heard me talk about this, if 1406, then 2025. Nisan 10 is a hard-coded date. We're just not sure specifically. I'm not sure specifically about this year because I wasn't there to independently verify it, which is why my research had 3 different years in view. This is the most popular. So if this, then this. So there's 70. Well, how do we get to 70? That's actually verifiable in a couple of different places, specifically in Psalm 90:10. That is pretty much what that's a reference to. If you account for the fact that Moses wrote Psalm 90, that puts it, many people think David wrote it, which they think it automatically is a prophetic thing talking about the rapture or the second coming of Christ. It's not specifically. It actually was written by Moses pre-entry into the Promised Land. So it has significant implication with regard to counts related to entry into the Promised Land and from entry into the Promised Land. That is primarily what Psalm 90 is about. But we gain 70, an understanding of 70 in multiple ways from there, and also from Daniel 9, specifically what that chapter is all about. It's all about 70s. He was in the 70 years of Babylonian captivity when he received the vision of the 70 weeks, the 70th week of which will begin on the 70th Jubilee. And that is precisely what Ezekiel 40, which is the opening of Seal 1, the measuring for the temple, Nisan 10 of a Jubilee year, factors into. However, there is a secondary way that we can validate that, and that is with the pattern in the mount, the overlay of the pattern in the mount. Just like you can use the established count from Leviticus 25 to count forward to the end, you can also use it to count backward to the beginning. And this is where we must conclude. We must. And if you don't understand this, if you don't agree with this, then you're not going to agree with this conclusion. There is a specific Sabbath cycle that was established by God in Genesis 2. 6 days he created, on the 7th day he rested. That was written into the law in Exodus 20 as one of the 10 commandments given to Israel, that they would work the 6 days, and in the 7th day they would rest. It was to be a Sabbath to the Lord. Then it was written into the law in Leviticus 25 for the land, which is what Daniel's 70 weeks are. They're predicated upon those weeks of years, these Sabbath cycles. 6 years they would work the land, and the 7th year it would rest. Then they were to number 7 Sabbaths of years, the space of 49 years, and then in the 50th year held and proclaimed Jubilee. So that's what this is. There are periods of Jubilee from the commencement of that command, which was when you shall come into the land. That's Joshua 4:19. They came up out of the Jordan on the 10th day of the first month, encamped in Gilgal on the east border of Jericho. That is why every single year, and a week of years, every single week of years, and thus every single Jubilee, which is simply the 50th year of a count, begin on Nisan 10, which is why Ezekiel benchmarks the start of the 70th week with a specific event that is Nisan 10 of a Jubilee year. Regardless, so the Sabbath was written into the law for the land. And then 2 Peter 2 tells us, 2 Peter 3 rather, tells us that one day is with the Lord as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is as one day. So then it overlays the entirety of world history, which is where we come here. It doesn't say that one day is exactly 1,000 years. It says one day is with the Lord as, which means similar to, not the same. And it wouldn't be the same because I have another chart where I'm not going to go into this, but I can, it's on my academia page. It's biblical events overlaying world history. It includes the life of Christ. If you are looking specifically for 6,000 exactly, you are absenting the life of Christ from the overview of world history. Ironically, you would be doing the exact same thing that the Jews do, who are looking for 6,000 years, as they absent the life of Christ because they don't believe in him. So even if you don't realize what you're doing, or they don't realize that that's what they're doing, that is what people who believe in an exact 6,000 years are doing, is they are absenting the life of Christ from a point to a point, is 33 and a half years or 34 years. So the timeline of world history will include that, and it is shown here. So when you understand that there will be about 6,000 years, the closest you're going to get is 6,027, and then plus 7 for the 70th week. So that takes you back to 4003 BC for creation. Now, like I said, having gotten all of that out of the way, now we can take the years out and just look at the overlay of world history from Exodus 19 through Joshua 13. So what you have is a benchmark event. Exodus 19, the giving of the law on Sinai. Moses was commanded to go up the mount for 40 days, which he did, and God handwrote the commandments on tables of stone, gave them to Moses. When Moses came down the mount after 40 days, he and Joshua with him thought the camp was being invaded, but oh no, Israel was just dancing around a golden calf naked and rabble-rousing. So he was down the mount for 2 days to deal with the people, during which he tried to offer himself in place of them, and God said no. The guilty will be on the hook for their own sins. The only person in all of history who was allowed to pay for the sins of the guilty, being an innocent themselves, was Christ. Moses was not allowed to. So after he was 2 days down the mount, and this is these verses down here, you can read the accounts of these to validate them. But after he was 2 days down the mount, he was given the command to go back up the mountain to take his own tables of stone to write the commandments again himself. So this second period of gray is the second period of 40 that he was up the mount to receive the tables of stone. Now, when he came down the mount at the end of that period of 40 days, in Exodus 34:29, his face was shining from being in the presence of the Lord. Israel could not look upon him because his face was so bright. And this is actually a preview of the precise time in world history when you plug the years back in where Christ had his ministry. He died and rose in glory. The transfiguration occurred during that time, which Moses appeared with him and Elijah during this actual period in world history from 16 AD to 65 AD. It was in the 30s AD where that would have occurred, but it was previewing the transfiguration and the glorification of Christ when you plug the actual years back in. However, Moses comes down the mount with the tables of stone that second time, and the next chapters from Exodus 35 through 40 are the conduct of a willful offering to gather the implements to make the tabernacle in the wilderness, including the inks and the dyes and the garments and all of that stuff for the priests. And then they build the tabernacle in the wilderness, and then this last period of 40 is them wandering in the wilderness for 40 years before they enter the promised land, Joshua 4:19, at the end of that 40 years. And then there is a 7-year conquest for the land of Canaan, which occurs from Joshua 4 through Joshua 11. Then the land rests from war. There is a recounting of their victories in Joshua 12 and Joshua 13. The lots are parceled to the tribes in the promised land. So you have from creation to kingdom to the parceling of the lots to the tribes in the promised land, 6,034 years. So, from the actual establishment of the jubilees, counting them at the reference point that we are given, yes, you can count backwards to creation and overlay the entirety of world history with how many jubilees and how many years. Yes, it is calculable based on the pattern of the Sabbath. However, when you begin at this point here, you have 70 to the end. Now, what I wanted to talk about is the period of 40, because when you plug these actual numbers back in, this, like I said, is the period in world history where Christ came, had his ministry, died for the sins under the old covenant, permanently shut it up, was buried, rose again on the third day, ascended to heaven. This is the period of time where from this Jubilee year to this Jubilee year, there are 40. And this is kind of what I wanted to talk about, because there's a reference in Matthew 9:15. Jesus said unto them, Can the children of the bride chamber mourn as long as the bridegroom is with them? But the days will come when the bridegroom shall be taken from them, and then they shall fast. What we observe about the number 40 is that it is typically a period of trying or of testing in the Bible. They wandered in the wilderness for 40 years. That was a period of trying, testing, and ultimately of judgment, because the ones who disobeyed, God said, would fall dead in the wilderness and would be forbidden entry into the promised land. We find that in Numbers. Jesus, when he began his ministry, the very first thing that he underwent was a period of testing. He was in the wilderness for 40 days. He fasted and then was tempted of the devil. Interestingly enough, when Jesus rose from the dead, he was there for 40 days before he ascended. And what you look for here is specifically what John 16, Jesus says in John 16, just before he goes to the cross. He says, These things I have spoken unto you, that in me ye might have peace. In the world ye shall have tribulation, but be of good cheer. I have overcome the world. Why would they have tribulation? Because there's going to be a period of 40, a period of testing without him present, at the end of which he will come gather those who are his. There are a great many occurrences of 40 in the Bible, and really all you need to do is go look it up. I mean, just Google it. As much as I am not a fan of using extra biblical sources, it is pretty clear from the reference material available the biblical significance of 40. It is associated with periods of trial, of testing, and ultimately of triumph. So just do yourself a favor and look at the number 40 in the Bible, and that's what you'll find. So what this period of 40 in actual terms means from Christ's ministry until Christ returns to take those who are his, and then the 70th week will commence. If here, then here, Nisan 10. is you have this period of 40, which is us absent Christ. It's this period of, in this world ye shall have tribulation, but be of good cheer, I have overcome the world. If the world hated him, it's going to hate us. That is what this period of 40 is. Just like back in Exodus, they were, after Moses came down the mount with that second tablets of stone, they wandered in the desert for 40 years. They built their tabernacle. This is Christ, the end of Christ's ministry, which resulted in the new covenant and him becoming the chief cornerstone of that new covenant and building up the spiritual temple. That is what this is. Moses in Exodus built the tabernacle in the wilderness, and they wandered for 40 years. Jesus is building the spiritual temple upon which he is the chief cornerstone, or underneath which he is the chief cornerstone, and we are lively stones build up a spiritual house. And this is the period of 40 that we are without him. And one day, in the very near future, we shall be with him. So I just kind of wanted to point this out. This period of 40 is synonymous with testing, with trials, at the end of which there is triumph. In Exodus's case, it was, well, Joshua's case, actually, it was after they wandered in the wilderness for 40 years, their triumph was entering the promised land. And yes, they had to conquest for the land for 7 years, after which it rested from war. So yes, Jesus will come to take those who are his, and then there will be a conquest for the land for 7 years, after which the land will rest from war when Jesus returns at the second coming, puts an end to it, sets up his kingdom in righteousness, and rules it for 1,000 years. The last point of which, in Ezekiel's vision, it starts on Nisan 10 of the final Jubilee year with the measuring of the temple, which is seal 1, and it ends with the parceling of the lots to the tribes in the kingdom. So I just kind of wanted to remind people of what that 40 is symbolic of. It's Christ building a spiritual temple until he removes the spiritual temple and the physical temple gets rebuilt. Absolutely a dispensational aspect. And that would mean from here to here is 70, which coincides with Psalm 90 and also the understanding that we gain from Daniel and the period, how 70 is relevant in multiple ways to Daniel 9. So if you have questions, let me know. If 1406, then 2025. If 1407, then 2024. We will know which year is correct if and when we see Gog and Magog. And that will be our indication of which year is accurate. Do I hope 2024? Yes. Do I think 2025? Yes. But it doesn't matter what I think. It matters what God's timetable is. And if 1406, then 2025. And if 1407, then 2024. So we either have 6 months or 18 months. And that is that. Because like I said, Nisan 10 is a hard-coded date. Either way, not much time left. But if you guys have any questions, let me know. I just thought that I would point that out. That the bridegroom being away is our period of testing. And what are the biblical periods of testing? 40. That's what is interesting about this last period of 40. It is our time without our bridegroom, these 40 jubilees, until such a time as he returns for his bride to take her away from this earth. And then the 70th week will commence shortly on the heels of that. So if you guys have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, have a good night. I'll see you later.